woven out of very organised, logical structures, as that one on the front. Okay, and I was running a yoga group at the time, and we decided that we'd have they liked the idea of it so much. There's another one. There's another life. It's getting a bit of a knot, but actually the background is really quite geometrical. So, and located.
But the lifeline is as well, isn't it?
Mm.
Because there's symmetry in both of those.
There is. Eventually it forms into symmetry. You might just die before you get to the symmetrical part.
That sounds right. Keep hoping.
There was a lifeline in that one. There was a perfect life that was self-consistent, or maybe eternally recurring, as we might talk about that. Now, these are photocopies of one which I'd sort of hand-coloured. And if you like, we might do this again. And we had a competition for the best colour. But I forgot to tell you to bring your crayons, you see, so other practice we could have done. And again, there's another sort of eternally recurring thing. In that one, that was just a field of octagonal
Sorry, Alan.
structures.
How do you mean a life? I mean an individual's life.
Yeah, in that we tend to look at our life as being haphazard. You know, literally the places we go to, the places we come back, and the time we spend doing this and doing that. But one of the old philosophical ideas is that the universe itself is geometrically structured, so that whatever you do, it gathers you and takes you into parts of its pattern. So that this chap here might think that his life has got very little meaning or purpose or direction, but actually the field that he's running in constantly pulls him into the right shape. And if it continued long enough, they're all eternally recurring. That one would go right the way round again and come back into itself. It's based on the fact that if the universe is a logical structure in that sense, and it's limited, and this is one of the things we'll hope maybe come across after we've read the thing, if it's a logical structure and it is also limited or mechanistic, which is nothing is coming into it to alter it, there's no new energy coming in or new matter coming in or anything like that, then it must necessarily repeat itself, even if it takes billions and billions of years, because it must go through all its formal functions and then go through all those formal functions again. Or as one very intelligent French physicist said, all the atoms must ultimately come back into the same relationships that they were in previously. Yes? Because it's a closed system and it's structured, they must all go all the way around again. It might take billions and billions of years, they'd come back together again.
But that line there, you say that chap's life. I mean, is that just how did you decide to convey some?
I just chose one and followed it around the pattern. One line of the pattern.
Right. So it's not like.
Just made it up.
I'm thinking of a life like
I plumbed.
Born, you know, and went to school and got married and.
Well, that was what it would look like in terms of movements, perhaps, in time.
But your choice of it was random, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. You could have chosen any.
But what I found with this one particularly is they were all pretty much of a muchness, this one.
Yeah.
Some of them were very different and some repeated themselves very quickly. But they tend to move from centre to centre and to come back into themselves on a broad field.
Yeah, so that's part of a almost circle, is it?
So in other words, the path looks random until you actually stand further and further back. You get more and more system to it.
Saying it's a bit like a fractal, because a fractal is just a
I wouldn't say it was like a fractal in the same sense, because fractals
they
are...
repeat and repeat and repeat within themselves and within themselves.
But they're holonic, aren't they? Because they go inside, and each hole is made up of fractal holes, made of fractal holes.
Right.
That doesn't do that.
No.
No. It could,
Yeah.
but
The other thing I was going to say is that, you know, you're talking about a mechanistic universe, and that there's nothing coming in. But wasn't Sheldrake suggesting that it's exactly the opposite of that?
he was suggesting that. But the chap I was quoting was a fellow called Poincaré, who was actually mechanistic physicist, and he was saying, surely that means that there must be something wrong with mechanism if ultimately everything must come back and go round again, and has possibly been going round many thousands of times already.
Yeah. But
scary thought. That's supposed to be the thought. Eugene considered that that thought was the one that actually drove Nietzsche around the twist.
yeah.
Because he took it on board very powerfully and decided that he was going to structure his life taking the fact that he might be doing this again and again and again, literally for an infinite number of times. He said, what if it's true, and necessarily and logically, the state of physics at the time was saying it must be true. Once they said it, you have to then sort of, you can't disprove it, because if you've got a mechanistic universe, they're like billiard balls, these atoms, and eventually they'll come back into the same configuration again. Does everyone agree with that? Can you see that that's necessarily true?
No, I don't think that is necessarily true. Because
Okay.
you've often said to us that you can't have two things exactly the same. There's no two Bob Burnings in the world made exactly the same. So doesn't that also, if you follow your logic, doesn't that also follow for patterns as well? Are two patterns ever exactly the same?
Well,
Are
what
they not
I'm,
just minutely different?
I'm not actually advocating
No, I'm just
this idea, because I disagree with it, as does Sheldrake, as did Eugene. But we talked about it because at one point, if you accept, and a lot of people accept the mechanistic universe at this moment, and there's no new energy coming into that, there's no new emergent into that, then it necessarily has to repeat itself because it's a closed system.
you just
Or run out of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've just got us to think, haven't you? Really, that's
Yeah.
all you've done.
Well, but it's an important thing, because
Yeah.
some of the guys we're going to be talking about maybe tonight, and some of the ideas that will come up when we start to look at time, are disturbing. Because if you see that, it is a disturbing idea. It certainly bothered a lot of physicists, it certainly bothered a lot of philosophers, and they argued away from it if they possibly could. Nietzsche took it fully on board, and so did Rudolf Steiner, because he was very strongly influenced by Nietzsche. And Nietzsche's point that if that's the case, then we must live every moment and make it significant, so that if we did live it again, it would be valuable to us. And then came from that you remember the moment and you project yourself into the future. He called it casting golden spears in front of you. You actually bury inside of yourself mnemonics to remind yourself that what you're doing is making yourself significant by everything you do in this moment.
It's beginning to take you into the process of karma, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it takes us into Gurdjieff and self-remembering,
Yes,
because
yeah.
that's part of this process,
Yeah.
is that what you could do is make yourself extremely conscious to make this moment very significant, and to remind yourself that of the state of your being. Right?
Are you
I was
saying
going to get to this towards the end, by the way. Sorry.
you know, the Hindu theory of reincarnation, and they say that we live for reborn for a million years.
I think it's 4,862, they say,
It's
in
a
each
long
kalpa.
time. It's a long time.
Yes, and you know, and it can seem like that on a wet Wednesday.
So that's what you, but then in that theory, each life would be slightly different
Yes.
because it's growing. The
Well-
consciousness is raising. I mean, the idea of the million years or 400,000 or whatever is that you end up towards enlightenment, and that's when you stop
Yeah.
being reincarnated.
Right.
So
what-
each life would be an improvement.
Right.
improvement. It's probably not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would imply that it's a spiral rather than a circle that's actually happening. You know, as you progress
So
through
when
life.
you're enlightened and you get there, that completes the circle.
Yes. And therefore you want to get off the wheel of life and death, because after you become enlightened, if it's been a mechanical process, then you then start going back into being unenlightened again and all the way back down again to the bottom. And there's some wonderful stories, yeah, because if it's purely mechanical, the whole universe, when it talks of a kalpa, we're going through the yugas at the moment, and we're at the worst one. This is the Kali Yuga, so it's the Iron Age, and men and women aren't getting on, and men and women aren't getting on, and there's an awful lot of strife about. They would say it's the Kali Yuga, and we're actually not evolving, we're actually getting worse. We've come down from the Golden Age into the Silver Age, into the Iron Age, and this is a time of warfare. So they would say that mechanically, it's very, very difficult to enlighten yourself in this age, because the Golden Age is the time to do it. Okay.
How long's an age?
Well, I forget the exact time actually.
Is it like 84,000 years, or is it
something like that? Yes.
okay.
I think it's
And they're not
something
all
like
the same, are they?
it's something in the region
Not
of
the same numbers.
of
It was
that.
about 20,000. Some of them.
Yeah, I can't exactly
They're
remember
not all the
actually.
same.
Can I
Numbers.
just?
Right.
I've seen them and they're huge numbers. But I can't
They are
remember what
huge
they
numbers, yeah. There was a Latin philosopher who had a similar interpretation, probably copied from the Indian metaphysics, because they seem to write it down earliest. Again, it's a similar idea that if this universe is mechanistic, then it will go through phases of getting better and then go through phases of getting worse. And there are legends. There's a very famous one. I forget the name of the king, but one of the sages has to go to him and say, "Now listen, you're knocking the people about too much. Yes, you've got to execute a few, and you've got to be strict and all that, but you're being too strict, and the people are being crushed and everything." And the king responds very arrogantly and says, "Well, I'm the king. I can do what I like." And the sage says, "Please come out with me." There's an ant's nest outside, and there's a whole column of ants all marching into the ant's nest. And he says, "Can you see the ants?" And the king says, "Yes. What's this got to do with me?" And the sage says, "Every one of those ants has been a king here before you. Every one of them. So don't be so cruel, because you'll be at the bottom. You're at the top now, but you will be at the bottom. So treat the bottom people good. You know, this is the way the system works. You have to have kindness and charity towards these people, because we go up and we go down." And I could have brought a picture, because we was talking on this on Friday night at our place, and the concept here was the Wheel of Fortune. I don't know whether you've seen the Wheel of Fortune. If you know the tarot pack, there's one on the wall outside. The Wheel of Fortune is an individual life, but it's taken from samsara, the wheel of life and death, which is the Indian concept of many, many lives, in which you go round and round on the wheel of life and death. And you do get better, and you do get worse mechanically, so you've got to get off the wheel. There are mechanical processes of improving yourself. Now that you can jump ship and actually enlighten yourself is a different concept that the Indians really struggled with. That history actually is evolving, is more of a Hebrew concept or a Jewish concept, because they had a history was actually getting better, and they changed. It didn't repeat itself. Whereas in Indian metaphysics, it goes round and round in circles, and if you get off, you get off. But if you stay on, you'll start going down again, because the process does. If you get off, you then unborn in that sense, or it's called the Kaivalya. You're then able to choose freely as to what level at which you place yourself in life.
Why do you need to come back and have more life?
You don't.
Yeah, right.
You don't. And so in that sense, it's a choice on your behalf what you do.
These are the people who are called bodhisattvas who can come back as teachers.
Yeah, that's a Buddhist concept. They come back to help other people, because it's the generous thing to do in that sense.
Are they enlightened? Are they enlightened? Or
Yes.
not? They are.
And then they come back to help. They might come back in the form of somebody extremely damaged.
Yes.
You know, they don't have to come back as sage-like characters.
I thought that when you were enlightened, you didn't come back at all.
You don't have to come back. It's a choice. That's what it's meant to be. Because then you're free, able to will. Which is one concept of many concepts to do with time.
Yes, but you've just got to ask the question then, haven't you? What evidence is there of it? You know, I've heard all these, I've heard, these ideas before and whatever, but what is there for it? If somebody's designed it that way, then we're talking about God. There must be a God, that it's going to go up and come down mechanically. Or
Not necessarily, Hilary, because what a lot of the Sankhya philosophy which we've just been expounded is atheistical. They say that's the structure of the universe. It doesn't have to have a personality behind it. That could be a mechanism that is the way that the universe works. It doesn't necessarily have to have a personality, which is a God. Someone in there who's actually got a vested interest in it. So that, I mean, on Friday night we were talking about the Bhagavad Gita, which is an intrusion into a vast poem with a personal God enters into a situation on a battlefield. The rest of the story has no involvement like that. And you can take that as a sort of an image of the fact that a lot of yoga teaching is atheistical or agnostic. Whether there's a God or not, it doesn't matter. The yoga still works and enlightenment still works. So you don't have to believe in a God to become enlightened. It's a process of self-improvement, which rests on the way the universe works, not on somebody wanting you to succeed. A personality, if you like, behind the whole process who's designed it for your benefit. So it could be atheistical, and a lot of them would consider themselves to be atheists. And I know a lot of Buddhists who consider themselves to be atheists in the same sense.
I can see part, but I still think, the evidence part. Where's the evidence?
Well, we can talk a little. If you bear with me, what I'd rather do is read this once, and then we can have a discussion, or we could go through it and break it down bit by bit, because this is quite a valid piece in its own right. When I first read this, I was very moved by it. And in fact,
this afternoon on the internet.
Yeah.
It is very good. But when you talk about ages and, we're in the heavy age now, and so, by the time you get to our age, you've come up against all these different ideas at some time in your life, in the end you just feel like saying, where is any evidence for it? The Buddhists, the Indians, the Hindus, the Bhagavad Gita, beautiful thing, the Bhagavad Gita, but where is the evidence to say that any of this happens?
right. Well, I think that's what we could say about that is, we'll come back to that in a bit. Okay. Because it's a valid question. A very valid question. Right. Now, I could read all of this, but you'd probably get very fed up with my Scouse drivel. Would anybody else like to have a go with me and maybe do a bit? Okay. Would you like to start us off then? And then maybe, do you want to just do those first three thingies, and then at the end of that, we'll see if anybody else wants to take over?
Okay.
Okay, slow and steady, because it's not something you can glibly charge through.
Yeah. We use the word eternity in three main senses. Most generally, the word is taken to mean an unending extent of time. This is probably the use we would meet most often in ordinary conversation, but we can find it also in certain philosophy. The word is also used to stand for that which is entirely timeless, for a state of being in which no movement is conceived to occur. We hear this use in the expression, I stood still for what seemed an eternity. The third use of eternity refers to that which includes but transcends time. In this use, time is conceived to be a process of events occurring in serial order, such that each event displaces the one before it and is displaced by the one after it. The whole series of events occurring within some substance itself not determined by such a process.
Good. Okay. I'm not going to stop here with this. We're just going to flow on. We can always take it back again after we've been through the whole thing. Would anyone like to take it on a section further, please?
A good image of this third kind of eternity can be seen in the sea, which is the substantial support of various wave patterns. We may stand on a cliff and watch what we call a series of waves travelling over the sea. We may count the waves and see how many pass a given rock in 1 minute or in 1 hour. If we concentrate very hard on counting the wave crests, we may forget the unity of the sea, which is the basis of their existence. In the same way, in our daily lives, we may concentrate so strongly on things that interest us that we may forget that all things are really only modifications of some universal energy, which stands as the substance of all reality. Today we know scientifically that all material things are only patterns of energy. We know that reality itself is like a vast ocean of energy, the wave patterns of which constitute all the things we know: the stars, suns, planets, minerals, vegetables, animals, and ourselves. All these things rise like waves upon the sea and then fall back into their origin. We know that that into which they fall back endures beneath all its inherent changes. Just as the sea endures beneath and through all its changing waveforms, all the gentlest movements and most violent storms, so beneath and through all the changing events of the time plane is the enduring ultimate reality we call eternity.
Okay. Anyone next like to carry on?
Yes, I'll go.
Thanks.
If we accept that we should use the word time, that which presents itself to us in a series of events which vanish as the next appears, then we can use the word eternity for that from which appears each event and into which each event vanishes. Eternity, then, is seen as the permanently enduring reality underlying the things and events which appear in time. Time is like the waves and the wave patterns which we observe passing over the surface of the ocean. Eternity is like the ocean itself. Using this image to aid our thinking, we can see that time is a process in the eternal, supported by the eternal, but not in itself the eternal. Waves are a process or behaviour of the sea, supported by the sea, made substantially possible by the sea, but are not themselves as such the sea. None of us has seen a series of waves dashing towards the shore without the sea. I continue.
Someone else like to take it on? Yes, please.
Just out of interest, there's a couple of, from my point of view, there's a couple of lines missing.
Right.
Which said, just back it up slightly, waves are a behaviour or process of the sea, supported by the sea, made substantially possible by the sea, but are not themselves as such the sea. The sea can subsist without the waves. We have all seen a calm sea. The waves cannot exist without the sea. Then it goes on and on as the same. No, I happened to, I copied mine out of the magazine, the church magazine.
Right.
So I'm just sent just it's only fractional difference in so far as mystical sentences.
Could you say that again, please, Alan, just so that I can find it in mine?
Yes, sorry. Where it says waves are a behaviour or process of the sea, supported by the sea, made substantially possible by the sea, but are not themselves as such the sea. No?
Just a sec.
You'd be better, you ought to. There's a paragraph which starts, starts off eternity.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, eternity, then
Yeah,
the
we'll
sea.
go down about. I'm sorry about this.
It's okay.
No, because those two lines were very good that you've just read out.
Yeah, it
Yes.
helps with the picture.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
why
Mhm.
otherwise I'd have kept quiet.
Yeah.
It did help me with the picture of the
Yeah.
sea with no waves at all on it.
We've all seen a calm sea, that.
Mhm.
Yes. The sea can subsist without the waves.
Yeah.
We've all seen a calm sea. The waves cannot exist without the sea.
Mhm.
And then it goes back on to that. None of us has
Yeah.
seen a series of waves.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry about that.
All we can do is carry on with
Oh,
that
yeah.
bit, but unless anybody would want to write it in, would anybody want to write that in? And you could dictate it to us? Some people are already
Yeah.
doing that now. Could you
Can you just say it again?
say
Can you
again?
say it again?
Oh, I shouldn't have started this. should I? I'm not sure. I can't tell for sure where yours finishes.
Yes,
Sorry,
that's
top-
what I'm
top
trying to
of page-
establish.
Top of page 2 here.
Yeah.
That's what it's referring to.
You've got a bit which says waves are a behaviour or process of the sea, supported by the sea.
Yeah.
Am I right? Made substantially possible by the sea, but are not themselves as such.
Yeah,
The sea.
none of us has seen a series of waves dashing towards the shore without the sea.
So it's
No.
between those two.
Well,
trees.
between those two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
between them, yeah.
The words, the sea can subsist without the waves. Full stop.
The sea can subsist without the waves.
And we have all seen a calm sea is the next.
Yes.
What's it after the,
So the next,
Without the
then
waves,
yeah.
without the waves, and then
we have all seen a calm sea. Full stop.
without the waves, full stop.
This, yeah, and then the third sentence is the waves cannot exist without the sea. So there are just three short sentences missing. The sea can subsist without the waves. We have all seen a calm sea. The waves cannot exist without the sea. Then it goes on. None of us has seen a series of waves, etc.
So we're also proofreading what's on the web, aren't we? In doing this, in finding that there are errors
Mhm.
in the web,
Mhm.
in the web
Yeah.
version.
Yeah, this is.
This is version of it.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I haven't got those in this one, which is 1973 or 74.
Yeah, well, 1969.
This
Yeah.
is 1969, yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering when those words got lost, Alan, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they are
Must
very
be.
significant, aren't they?
Well, they help with the picture.
they help with the picture, yeah.
Not
I wouldn't say they were very
No.
significant, I would say that they're important.
Important is
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Does anyone need for them to go through again, or have we got them? Right, okay, so we can carry on then from,
We see
Yeah, next
Yeah.
paragraph. We see
so, who's reading that? Sorry, excuse me.
that lady over there.
Sheila.
Sheila, I couldn't remember her name.
Right, I don't know anyone's name.
that. Hey, you.
Stuck with it.
We see then that eternity is the substantial basis from which the waves of time may rise, and we see no time exists other than that made possible by the eternal reality underlying it. Time depends upon the reality of eternity. Eternity does not depend upon the changes of time. Whatever arises in time also vanishes in time. Babylon is fallen. Great empires that arose in the ancient world are no more. Egypt is gone, and Greece and Rome with it. The gorgeous palaces of India's past are overgrown with time's weeds. All is vanity in the time process. Vanity here simply means that which passes, that which vanishes. Bale is an old word for straw. When the human soul contemplates the tremendous stretches of time behind it and images the rise and fall of vast civilizations, a strange sadness permeates it. It asks itself, what is the meaning of these vast undertakings, these enormous projects? If all that arises in time must ultimately vanish from time, why should we strive to establish anything? Eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Is that enough? I don't see it.
That's fine. Would anyone else like to carry on?
I will.
Thanks, Sean.
But time is only the patterns on the ocean of eternity. What appears in time is lifted for a period out of eternity, and to eternity must return. To die is only to pass from time back into eternity, only to pass from the realm of the transitory to the realm of the ever-enduring. What we call life in time is a process, a kind of activity marked by a series of events, irreversible in character. We say irreversible because although a child grows up to become a man, the man does not grow down to become again the child. The seed of the tree grows up to become a tree. When the tree has reached its maximum height and after some years dies, it does not become smaller and smaller and finally return to the original seed. Before its death, it makes new seeds, many new seeds to replace the ones from which it started its life.
Thank you. Anyone next? Ron, please.
Every life form coming into existence grows in some unique way, predetermined from within itself, and prepares a seed or seeds to leave behind it to take its place after the form has served its purpose. The life forms which appear in time are like the wave patterns which appear on the sea, that are possible only because the sea is there. The life forms of time are possible only because eternity is there. Time is a process made possible only on the substance of eternity. Life forms in time are possible only because the eternal substance of life supports them. What we call the everlasting arms of God are simply the powers of the eternal substance which brings into being all the things and beings of the time world. There is no quarrel between eternity and time, for time is of eternity, and eternity supports and develops time. But often there is a quarrel in man's mind about whether to serve the God of eternity or the idols of time.
Thank you, Ron. Anyone else like to carry on? Please, thank you.
We may select from the waves upon the ocean a given wave, concentrate our attention upon it, declare it the best wave we have ever seen, feel pleased as it moves with massive dignity up over the ocean, and then feel sad when our favourite wave subsides and ceases its movement. And while we are doing these things, we may forget the ocean itself, forget that which the age presupposes. So with things of time, we may select from amongst all the things presented to us, the form of which give us the greatest pleasure: the best house, the best man for husband, the best woman for wife, the best car, the best clothes, and so on. And while we are admiring the objects of our choice in time, we may forget the eternal real substance. When we think only of things of time, value only the things of time, worship only the things of time, we are called, and rightly, idolaters. For as the waves on the ocean cannot exist from themselves independently of the ocean, so the things of time cannot exist from themselves independently of the eternal power substance of God.
Thank you. Anyone want to just round it off? Thanks, Deirdre.
The things of time are only effects. They're not causes. They're relatively superficial appearances brought into existence by the action of supreme cause hidden in the infinity of eternity. If If we do not wish to be superficial, if we wish to relate to reality and to each other in depth, we must learn to see what lies under the wave patterns of the human soul. We must learn to feel the movements of the infinite spiritual power, which is the substance and sustainer and origin and goal of all things. We must learn to believe that underneath all the things and purposes of time stands the other purpose, the purpose which comprehends all the purposes of time and gives them whatever significance they have, the purpose of eternity, the purpose of the infinite hidden God, within whose hands we are held and will be held forever.
Right, now that's the finish of that piece. The other things at the bottom were associated with it when I first read it, and I've just attached them on there, because whether they were with it in the first place or whether they were part of the talk, I don't know, but I didn't feel that it was my place to take them away. So they're there. They don't follow directly, but they're not unrelated at all. Okay? So we might come to them if we have time, but to come back to, if we have time, to come back to the questions of time, we've been through it all once. I propose now we either go through it again, taking it bit by bit, or has anybody got questions which they think they'd like to ask? Hillary's already asked an important question, which I think we might be able to frame a better answer to if we just leave that for a moment, the question of evidence for what might possibly be outside of time. Would that be a good way of putting it?
Yes.
Okay?
What does forever mean then?
Right. Technically,
it's how you look at it. Isn't it?
yes. So Eugene's actually tried to tackle that head on with the first 3 points, isn't he? That some people think that eternity is a great deal of time. I mean, I know when I first read it that that's what I originally thought of it. Although I knew that the Greeks meant actually something which stood separate from time. It's also part of that very famous poem by Omar Khayyam, that the moving finger writes. And now that was always taken to be part of this sort of Greek concept that is an eternal thing which is creating time out of itself. That what is the God that is writing our time, writing our life for us, continues to do so immovably and is not responsive. All your tears and all your piety nor wit cannot remove one word, or all your tears remove one jot, or remove one line is the actual thing. So what Omar Khayyam is saying is that you move through time like that erratic thing, and that the process is mechanical, and that even though you regret something, or if you're extremely upset or remorseful, you can't undo what is past, that it's immediately taken away from you. And I remember being very, very concerned once because a friend of mine had actually died, and the moment that they died, it seemed possible that they were very, very close, and then within a matter of hours they were slipping away, and it still felt as if they were part of the world but getting less and less of the world as time passed, and within 3 days it was inconceivable, their life had just gone. And it's almost as if you could reach back and grab them by the hand and drag them back into the present, but of course you can't. And I felt as if I was just watching them fall further and further back into the past. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
And they were becoming unreachable,
Yeah.
and soon they'd become forgettable, and I wouldn't actually remember them on a daily basis, which is what I was doing at the time. And that really brought home to me the fact that there is a thing called time's arrow that we're going to talk about probably in a few minutes, is the fact that time only goes in one direction, and that it literally, it is impossible to drag it back. What is past has happened, is past and has happened and is fixed. One of the philosophers of time said, what is fascinating about time is it is so asymmetrical. The midpoint is now, and the past is absolutely absolutely fixed and the future is completely malleable. So this side of the equation doesn't fit that side of the equation at all. They're completely different. And this is becoming that very, very quickly, and there's not much you can damn well do about it. It slips through your fingers.
Could it not be the moving finger writing? Could not be at the time itself of the individual, each individual doing the writing, as it's
It could be,
moving
but it
through?
doesn't have that feeling because the individual is the one who cries and weeps and tries to drag it back. So it feels like it's an immortal hand which is not responsive, not actually a personal God, or a rather impersonal God. Sorry.
Oh, so the fickle finger of fate.
Yes. Actually, what the just elucidating that, what we had was we were using, I mentioned the Wheel of Life, the Wheel of Fortune, which was a drawing that we were using by Albrecht Dürer. And in the corner of it, there was this thing which neither V nor I could understand. And I said, what is that that's drawn in the corner? And V was at a different angle to it. She was standing up looking down, and she said, it's a hand, it's a finger. And it was a hand doing this. It was God's hand coming in from the top left-hand corner, and with a rod was actually turning the wheel, or it was a divine hand. You know, I don't know whether you've seen alchemical texts. In alchemical texts, when God, the prime mover, enters into the situation, there's a cloud and a hand coming down, and he's sort of prodding a situation, or fixing, or dropping lightning into heat up a crucible or something like that. And this was the fickle finger of fate, if you like, but in that case it's the divine fickle finger of fate which is just entering in. And of course fate is deciding a path. Right, first of all let's have a look, because time, we think we know what time is, as St. Augustine said, until we start to think about it. And then we realise it's very, very difficult to conceive of. I've got a quote here of Parmenides. Why I want to say it, because this was the thing I was going to lead off with before I got dragged into all sorts of eternal recurrences and things. And just to show you that what Eugene is talking about here is very important, or was always considered very important in philosophical circles. Anaximander is one of the first philosophers that the Greeks ever had. He's the 6th century BC. We've only got fragments of what he wrote. We know of his great reputation as a philosopher because of the way other people wrote about him, or when his books and his theories were still around in Greece. But we have literally, I mean, less than a few notes of things that he actually wrote. And this is one of the things which, from the 6th century BC, pre-Socratic this was, into that from which things take their rise, they also pass away once more. This is fitting. It's fitting to make one another reparation and satisfaction, to one another for their competition according to the ordering of time. He was very concerned, this is what the commentator is writing about Anaximander, very concerned with the now point, with change and the imbalance of resolution in time. Very concerned about change and imbalance. When someone like Einstein looks at time, he says there are only a few things that let us know that time actually exists. Some things last for a period of time. Some things happen together, and some things happen one after the other. Without those three things, we wouldn't know that time was passing. That's Einstein's theories. So Einstein said if there was no time, if there's a place in the universe which is eternity, none of those things would happen. Nothing would last, nothing would happen together, and nothing would happen one after the other. So he said eternity is inconceivable. Okay? Which is a very, very old idea. What Anaximander is saying is the same sort of thing. He's saying when we look at the time, when we look at time and the things of time, We see things rising out of it and falling back into it. This is Eugene's waves on the sea. We see forms appearing, us, atoms, universes, and then falling back in again. The thing that they fall back into seems to convey, to hold and contain all these things, but it itself can't be like time. So eternity is inconceivable, is what Alexander is saying. Like Eugene is talking about the sea. We can't conceive of what it would be like to live in that state because there's no movement. Nothing lasts, nothing happens together, and nothing happens one after the other. Everything is still. Does that make sense? Okay? So the idea of eternity is really a very big idea and impossible for us to conceive of, other than to say it's an abstraction which has to be there for all the things that we do see and come out of something to go back into. Yes? No? Yeah. These are difficult concepts.
We could say time is the abstraction.
Sorry?
We could say time is the abstraction.
Well,
out of eternity.
we could say that, but we can't conceive.
So
Well,
not in the sense of an idea.
yeah, but you can't conceive of eternity, can you?
No.
I mean, you can't even see what a possible life there would be because nothing happens. Because happening is something inside of time.
So really we're trapped in time and the rest is mystery, isn't it?
We are in time. Whether we're trapped or not, I don't know, because
Well,
there seems to be a big
How
drop
can
at
we
the end.
move out of it because we don't have the capacity to know that which is not. I mean,
That's right. So whatever it is to us, trapped, if you like, trapped in time, a complete abstraction. It's a possibility. This is because what appears to us is things seem to come into time, last for a period of time, and then disappear. That's what seems to happen, doesn't it? I mean, we've just been talking out in the garden about spring, about all the flowers coming out and the blossom, etc. And it seems to appear on a regular basis at this time of year, and then it goes somewhere. It seems to just dissolve. Now the matter it's made of stays here. It becomes, what, leaves? I don't know whether Ron and Zohar burn theirs or whether it becomes composted, and then it recycles again. So the matter stays here without the shape, but the shape changes completely and becomes something else. You know? When Shakespeare says, you know, a poor man can eat a king because a king can die, be eaten by worms, you can go fishing with worms, catch a fish, and then eat the fish. You've eaten the king. You've actually, the forms of those creatures have used the same matter. I remember seeing one thing in an encyclopedia that was saying it is calculatable with the volume of the air on the earth that we probably breathe the same atoms of oxygen as Leonardo da Vinci, Jesus Christ, Attila the Hun. That literally this, you know, the usages of material substances, the world recycles them constantly. What changes is the form. The matter seems to stay the same. If any of those people who came to the Sheldrake talk, Sheldrake was saying, this is because we've got an mechanistic idea that no energy comes into the universe or goes out of it, that all the energy stays constant, the same. If you accept that, all this thing is constantly being recycled, and the forms which are coming in are shaping it in a different way. Where do those forms come from? And then where do they go to? Because something must be holding them, because we see the same forms every year, but they haven't been there for 12 months. Do you understand me?
Yeah.
It's not as if, you know, okay, we've got them on the shelves in the warehouse and we get them out and hang them on the trees, you know. As we used to do in the theatre, we used to have leaves and stick them on trees with sellotape. It's not, it doesn't happen like that in nature. You know, they grow and they come out and they emerge, and then they seem to just withdraw, and the matter changes colour and just crumbles. And then it becomes something else, and another form will take it and turn it into a slug or something like this, and that will go into something else, which will become something else, and change and change and change. So the matter is malleable. In Indian metaphysics they call that prakriti. That's being used constantly. Forms are coming along and saying, I'll have a bit of this. if you don't look at it, as they're saying, if you don't look after this, something will come along and take it over. It might be a microbe, it might be a tiger, because they like to come along and take bits and use that for their forms as well. So forms are coming into the world and going out. Where the hell did they go to?
Yes.
What looks after them? And who says, okay, you're on? Or is there a wings, where there's, okay, you're on, come on, get off, you've had your 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Because it's going to happen to us.
Can I just say something that, as somebody who never really grows anything, not for years, I haven't
Yeah.
grown, but years, and I've just planted these nasturtium seeds in the house in a seed tray in the kitchen. And seeing them all come up, these little things with one nasturtium leaf on the top,
Yes.
and the windows here, and they're all like that. I turn it round in the night, and they're all going the other way.
Yeah.
And the magic that's in that seed tray, that they could, and saying here about the tree,
Yeah.
the huge tree leaves its seeds behind, and human beings leave theirs. Somewhere there's this massive plan and design going on for everything. To me, it just could not be just evolution.
You asked for the evidence, didn't you?
Not of
You
this.
just provided it.
No,
Yeah?
not of this. This here, I'm prepared to believe that.
No, but the evidence
usually-
literally for what we were
Yes.
talking about.
But it's the age, all this about the golden age and
Yeah.
you go down up the wheel and down the wheel and you can jump off and all that. It's for that I'm saying.
Well, what you're talking about is literally what you're saying about the nasturtium seeds. And see, your life will go through exactly the same processes. And if we can call it as a wheel, because it will take longer than it happens for those seeds, but it will come to fruition, it will come into flower, and then it will fall from flower and eventually fade. So the process is exactly the same.
This physical life.
Yeah, this
Yes,
body.
But the thing that's for however many thousands of years it is, that you reach your highest level and then you start coming down again, and if you get off halfway, if you can get off yourself, you will go into eternity and choose whether you can come. Well, that's what I'm saying. Where's the evidence for that?
The evidence for that, all we can say is that you have to. Well, yoga is quite specific. They say you don't listen to anybody. Try it, really, because there's no one you could trust.
No.
There's no one you could believe if they told you. So the only evidence that you could literally rely upon is if you could do it yourself. So it then becomes a question of how prepared are you to do the work that they say is necessary to get into that state. And if you are prepared to do the work, then start now. And if you're not, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. Literally the choice is there. And there are the only two choices as far as they are concerned. It's not a proselytizing form in yoga, you see. They understand that most people won't be bothered, and most people won't see that it's even possible to do anything about it. But that's why the point about Nietzsche is important, because there you have somebody of a philosophical bent who, when he realized that ultimately anything that he did was meaningless, or so much part of the grist to the mill, that the idea shook him to his roots. I couldn't find the quote. There's a wonderful quote of Bertrand Russell which is so pessimistic and downhearted. Honestly, you can't help but giggle, because he says, when you realise that nothing you can do, nothing you can think, nothing has never been thought before, the whole process, and that everything is going to literally run into a state of entropic heat death, and there's no possible glimmer of any individuality remaining at all, then you've understood completely what this life is all about. For Bertrand Russell, I'm sure that was it. But I think I read it last year in the Perennial Philosophy. I don't know whether you remember it. It was a really cheery little message from Bertrand. This is literally the way they talk themselves into a hole, by creating a universe which has no energy coming into it, no possibility of spiraling or generating new forms inside of itself. So that someone like a physicist like Poincaré could actually say, there must be somebody with mechanistic theory because the maths add up. If not a new energy comes in, everything must repeat itself over and over again or run down when the energy spreads out and becomes heat death. Now, the second law of thermodynamics says that energy is moving from more dense places into less dense places. That's what's happening throughout the whole universe. When all the energy is spread out and everywhere is equal, that's called heat death. And then the universe will never gather itself together again. It will just stop, still, finished.
But then when it does, time will finish because
Time will only exist while there's change. Yes.
time and space are inseparably linked.
Yeah.
So there was no time until there was creation and something was, and space was created.
Yes.
In other words,
Yeah.
the universe.
So the physicists talk of a singularity. In other words, there's a point from which time itself starts. Now, for most of us, we don't think like that. We think that that time is passing all the time. Physicists don't think that anymore because in terms of space-time, which was the term which Einstein actually presented to us, time is measured by change, and change varies throughout the universe at different rates. So, as far as physicists are concerned, time is a very peculiar thing, and it changes literally with particular operations. Let's have a look at some more anomalies, because that one that Eugene's mentioned is a fascinating one. After Parmenides, after Anaximander came another philosopher called Parmenides, and he says, well, actually, Anaximander's talking about the multiplicity of things, all these things coming into the world and going out again. The important thing is the great unity behind it all, the Apeiron, this great beingness out of which all these forms come. That's the really important thing, which is sort of what Sheila said when she said that time could be the abstraction and eternity could be the real thing. He's sort of saying that, but he can't describe as to what meaning you could give to that being state, which was filled with form, but none of it's moving or has any duration or any sequence.
Well, when does that happen? Time has no duration and...
In eternity, the thing where all these forms disappear into. Okay? Let's have a picture. Because this brings us right back to Eugene's thing again. What Eugene's talking about is, here's a waveform. There's a wave just about to surface paradise, this wave. Okay? That's a form. This here is the sea it's made of. Now, you've never seen the sea without it's got a shape. And you've never seen a shape unless it's made of something, and in this particular case we're saying it's sea. Yeah? So when you're looking at the two, Eugene is saying you're seeing form and substance. The substance actually hasn't got a form because it's an abstraction that we're just saying is one thing. We're dividing a unity into two things. We're dividing it into a form and something that makes the form, or the form is a shape of. Okay? Is everyone seeing that? Yeah?
Could you just repeat that, Alan?
Yeah. This form, this shape of the wave, is separable from the substance in our minds. But in reality, it isn't. In reality, that's a unity. You'll never see sea unless it's got a shape. Now, water's peculiar because it will take the shape of any container or any particular motion pattern that hits it. This is why I think Eugene's chosen water. For most things, but it's true of everything, you've never seen paper unless it's been in a shape. The substance of the paper has always held a particular shape. We can imagine paperness without shape in our heads, abstractly, but we could never make it. Could we?
No.
Mathematicians talk about a perfect triangle. We've never seen one. Not that that's a perfect one. But we can't make a perfect triangle because we have to imagine it and say that the line has got no thickness when it always damn well has. Actually, I once said that to someone and they said, no, it hasn't. I can think of a line that's got no magnitude. It's a line where two colours meet. You can see a line, but it's got no measure. You can't measure it.
It's an edge.
It's an edge, yeah. So you've got to be careful when you say that. But any triangle you've seen is an imperfect one because we can only make imperfect ones. Every circle you've ever seen is an imperfect one because we can't make perfect ones. We can imagine one. It's an abstraction. It doesn't actually exist. Wherever you've seen anything, it's always been substance making a shape. And we can separate shape from substance, but in reality, it never is. It's always a substance in a shape. There's always a thing which seems to be existing in time, or we can imagine the two things separately as an eternity and the form, but actually they're always together. So we're talking about two abstractions which we've only ever seen mixed to create the world or the universe or your life or the person sitting next to you.
So when Eugene talks about the substance of eternity, is that what we're looking at? It's
Yeah.
a concept that we can't grasp.
Yes, a concept which is we can grasp the idea of it, but we'll never see it in reality because whenever we get substance, it comes in a packet, a shape, or a form.
Yeah, because when we say the word substance,
Yeah,
we tend to look for a circumscription.
That's right.
around it, don't we?
and he would always translate it as the thing which is standing underneath every
Yes.
form.
Right.
So he would say it's substantia, it's the thing that's standing underneath. So a substance, technically, in terms of physics, is something which stands of itself. And then he would say, if you were talking to him, we are constructed in the same way as those waves of the ocean. We're talking about ourselves, that he's actually saying, coming into manifestation and going out of manifestation, and realizing while we're actually manifesting, we're those two things welded together or melded together in being. So the answer then comes to your question, what proof is there? You then have to say, what you'd have to do is to try and take yourself to a state where formally you are as still or as quiet as possible and see what you would experience of yourself. What Eugene said you feel is feelingness itself is the bedrock that you rest on, because the substance is actually aware, it's conscious. Not conscious as you are in terms of words and things, but that is what it does when it starts to literally process itself. But fundamentally, inside itself, the substance that we are made of feels itself. It has being. And being is an experience. It isn't just something that a scientist can capture in a test tube or in a solenoid.
Is it possible to say that the substance is love in the way that love is defined as potential, development of potential?
Yes, you could say that. If you see it as it's only energy that can develop potential. But you'd probably have to say, since it also withdraws itself from potential, in other words, once it's created a potential, it then uncreates it. You've got a fascinating problem there, though, because as we've just said about the substance, if you're developing, if you're loving a plant, then you're giving it the potential to develop its blossom, and then you withdraw the potential for it to then drop the blossom, and then the worms come along and eat it. Are you loving the worms as well, but you're still hating the plant?
But that's intrinsic in itself. It doesn't matter whether I am doing something with that
Yeah.
help that. It's intrinsic, isn't it? It does it whether I do it, whether I have a hand in it or not, usually. But if you withdraw,
But
If you
if you're
withdraw-
talking in terms of love as being the energy which is being given to
the
develop,
intrinsic one, not from my love for it, I mean actually within the whole thing.
well, if you're
Love is a
using love,
substance.
you're really mentioning a person. You're suggesting that there's a personality there that's giving
I'm not
something.
thinking in that sense, actually.
No?
I was thinking of the substance as being love itself in the way that
Universal
the,
love.
It flows in.
yeah, but in the way that Eugene describes it as
Yeah.
potentiality.
Yeah.
And if you say it withdraws a potential, it's only withdrawing potential in a particular form. It's not withdrawing
Mm.
potential because potential's there all the time.
Yeah, but if it's actually feeding that form to develop that, say this is a plant or a human being or a universe.
Yes. The substance has gone in to make that form.
Yeah,
As
and
we
then
call
it reverses and then comes out, and then it unmakes that form.
Yeah. But
Now-
the potential's still there, whether it's the form or not.
Right, so are you saying the potential is the form or the energy that's
No,
going
that's
into it?
which lies behind the form that creates it.
But that's leaving and going into another form over here, which it
Yeah,
seems to be
that's-
preparing
that's
at this
okay.
moment.
Yeah,
So there's no potential there anymore, it's here.
but it's there somewhere. It's within all of it. It's coming or going in different places, but
Yes,
it's there.
but while it's going, it
Underlying all
doesn't
of
feel
it.
like love, does it?
But that's because we read it that way.
Well, no, I think if you're saying it's to develop potential, I can see that it's going into a situation, it's developing it,
Yeah.
but when it's undeveloping it and it's falling
But if
apart,
you look bigger than that, it's it's
it's going somewhere else, though,
words
isn't
are so difficult, isn't it?
it? No,
Um,
well, yeah, but
if you look bigger than that, then the fact it's disappearing and reappearing is all part of the manifestation.
Yeah.
Evolution. It's
That's
the
true.
wholeness, isn't it?
the big thing is developing in terms of potential.
Yes, well, I'm
But
thinking
in
as
terms
big
of
as it
any
could possibly
any
be.
given situation, it's either rising or falling.
But I would still say
Because
that
there's
it's
so much
potential because it's like the wave, it's ebbing and flowing
Yeah.
on a bigger scale.
And there's only so
But
much
will the
potential
same
in any
wave
form
come
anyway,
back
and you
again?
can't develop
Saying
it
the same one
more than
come
it
again.
can be developed.
It's all
Or
about
is it
whether it's
another?
activating or not.
Yeah,
It's whether it's
I mean,
manifesting or not.
I can accept what you're saying in that sense. I understand that meaning, but if you're going to use as love, when we talk about love being developing the potential of somebody, we don't usually imagine that we're going to withdraw
No, I know
energy
that.
from
No,
them
I know
and
that.
watch them die, which is what
Yeah.
love ultimately does.
Yeah.
Now, if you can accept that withdrawing energy from a situation and letting it die is love,
Yeah.
what's actually happening is the energy which you're withdrawing is going somewhere else, so you're developing something else. But usually the person who's dying is
Yeah.
going, oh,
Yeah.
nobody loves me anymore
Absolutely.
because no one's feeding me.
But that's on an individuated
developing.
level. I was thinking on a
Yeah.
And actually that
much
substance
wider.
is God anyway.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
remember once being in a position where somebody was suffering, I mean it wasn't really awful, you know, it was short-lived. You
Mhm.
think, I can't do anything, what can I do? And you say, I've cried, what can God do? God is suffering.
Yes.
It's there in the suffering. So whatever happens and whatever the pain is in the withdrawal, the substance is suffering it. That whole substance is suffering that.
Yeah.
Well, the matter's suffered. It's only the material matter that is suffering. The spirit, if you like, the infinite sentient parts behind it isn't suffering because you can only suffer
It's
because
suffering
you've
in
got
that
a body.
place.
Yeah.
But hang on, is it the
Otherwise,
body
there
that
is no
suffers or is it the sentience that suffers? Because
sentience.
you can have an anaesthetic and you can chop your leg off and nobody will notice it. No one screams. The sentience is surely the thing that suffers, the material doesn't.
You just used the word sentience for the first
Yeah.
time. Can you say
Depends what you mean.
Sentience is feeling.
That's feeling awareness.
It's feeling awareness. And the body isn't sensitive to itself.
Right.
It's one of the processes that. So, sorry to come back to you, but we've gone off on a bit of a tangent. But I will accept that the whole field is developing.
Yeah.
But if somebody is dying or somebody is feeling totally neglected because their business is on the ground, that all the energy has been withdrawn from them, they will not feel that their development is being, their potential is being developed. They will feel that their potential
But
is
it actually
being
is, isn't it? Because we do actually grow through those sorts of things.
right.
And we're talking about more than one lifetime. So it's the way we view things that leads us to suffer.
Not
It's
everybody
from
is
the
talking about
individual.
more than one lifetime, so we
No,
have
no,
to
but-
include people. But even in one lifetime, you're going to suffer, and your
Yeah.
potential is going to
But
get.
it's usually our view of things which make it
Yeah.
determines whether we suffer or not. even pain from what Eugene talks about.
I must have
It's-
needed the lesson.
It's not that one wouldn't feel pain. I wouldn't feel. I mean, I certainly couldn't live in the way I'm talking now, but
Right.
but you know, because we forget it.
Right, that's
But
the
it
quality
doesn't-
I
but
wanted to add.
But it doesn't make it less so because we lose sight of it, does it?
No, it doesn't. That would not be for us. But if we're talking about a big picture, then we'd have to say the words development and the whole universe in that sense to describe how and why it was developing then becomes a really strange case to be discussed, because at any given moment something is rising and something is falling. In terms of individual experience, so people will be, I'm looking for another word, what's the opposite of development can we use? Disintegration?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So part will be disintegrating and another part will be actually developing. And they'll be happening simultaneously, probably alongside each other, because as the energy flows out of that, if that's a human body, then it's flowing into some sort of bacterial form, which is then going to reactivate and become something else. But this thing is going to feel extremely sad at that
Yeah,
point.
'cause that's
It will not
about-
feel it's being developed.
But that's about attachment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's personal attachment that does that.
Right.
It's not the same as what I'm talking about as being
Well,
as being a potentive
Well,
substance
no, hang on, no, it isn't,
that includes
because
everything.
no, it isn't to do with attachment, because in any state of the world, you'd have to say, well, that isn't developing anymore.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's developing through its cycle, and and its cycle, in effect, is a continuous development which includes disintegration.
Okay. Well, my body is going to disintegrate at some point in
Yes.
time.
And that's part of your life.
Now, when it's disintegrating, it's going to give itself to all sorts of bacteria, worms, maggots, and all sorts of things.
Which
That's
is
your
developing
potential.
its potential.
That's potential.
That's my potential.
Yeah.
I don't want
At
it.
that level.
I don't want that
There's
potential.
lots of different levels.
I've got lots of other potentials I'd much
There's
rather
lots of
have.
levels, aren't there?
Pardon?
It's lots and lots of levels. That's that.
But
grows
it's
to
not
zero.
my level, is it?
But your soul level,
You are.
your conscious level.
Right.
But it was mine, body, and now
But not you.
it's disintegrating.
But it's not you.
Okay.
Well, it's given to the world.
Then you have a very developed and sophisticated meaning of the word love. You have a very
I
sophisticated.
hope so.
Most people would not accept that as being.
But we're
Well,
not
we
talking-
in
yeah.
society would not accept that
No,
as
no,
love.
that's fair.
And most
When
of
you
us
say
don't
the
think that.
process is love.
When we say to our dearest loved one, I love you, dear.
Love is God.
And the sooner you
God is
become maggots,
Yeah.
the better. It hasn't got that ring to it, has it? Dearest Valentine, I can't wait for the worms.
Samaya defined what she meant by love at the start of what she said, didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was Eugene's definition, actually.
Yeah, but Eugene's definition is a very wide church.
Yeah, but
And so we have to be careful about it. And when we say it, we actually usually mean, I would suggest, developmental things and making things more sophisticated and more refined, rather than breaking them down into their building blocks and scattering them to the four winds, which is a form of development, but it would be very hard for an individual to actually see that, or a businessman to see the business
Oh,
going
I
that
agree
way,
with that. 'cause
or a
it-
family
yeah,
seeing their children
it
scattered
doesn't
and
make it
killed
less
in
so,
war.
though. It doesn't make it less so.
No, it doesn't make it less so, but you have to be careful though, because the word love then starts to lose its meaning if it also means that it's to do with destruction and the scattering and the breaking up. The word is being started to stretch that far that it loses its meaning.
It helps me, yeah.
Yeah,
I find it helpful.
But that's true. But you do understand that you must agree with me that the word starts to lose its meaning.
No,
No?
No,
no.
no.
No? Okay.
If you're a wave or an individual and you're disintegrating or disappearing, it feels like you've lost it.
Yes.
From the
Yes.
point of view of the wave or the
Yes,
individual when
it
the
does.
individual's dying.
Yes. And it would be
But
very
it-
difficult to hold it together, wouldn't it?
It's to do with identification, isn't it?
And yet we
Yeah.
need that separate. Eugene used to talk about yokes and jokes, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And the joke is when you're enjoying that bit, when you come into what you think is top-notch performance, if you like.
Yeah.
that part of the process.
Mhm.
And the yolk is when it all goes wrong and you're dying. You take it to the worst.
Yeah. But this person's body is being reduced to nothing at that point, and so they would have to, sorry?
Being,
Scattered amongst the birds.
feeding a worm.
Feeding a worm. It's much better, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not really.
But they're using design to define it's just that the body, in effect, is only all the dinners you ate.
Yes. Yeah, but you get attached to them.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
No. And some of them were dinners I didn't eat.
But that's what the love's all about. It's the developing past that stage of identification with the material body.
Right, so what are you identifying with then?
I'm identifying with the fact that what I was, if you like, spirit in eternity,
Right, and how?
and what I am is spirit in material body, self-imposed,
Right,
which I will let go of eventually.
okay.
Only I have a bit of trouble about how I'll let go of it. Never mind.
Right, well, we've got exactly the same problem that we have with time then, because the spirit in eternity has a form, a shape. Otherwise, how would it recognise itself? How would Alan be separate from any other form in eternity unless there's a shape there, there's a form to it?
No, the form is a human body, because that's the state of experience I'm in at the moment.
Right. But if there's a form in eternity called Alan, we've got a problem here. And there's another form called Alan. How would they recognise themselves in eternity if they aren't different in form?
Because they're different in their energies.
They're different.
Because their experiences change their energy patterns.
Pattern. Isn't the pattern a
Yeah.
form?
So we're back to the
You're back to the same problem.
But there's still also substance.
Yeah,
The
but
link
the
to
substance,
level.
but
we're up-
substance is the thing that
Unity.
holds the form. So it's universal.
But it's also spread throughout. And at one level, at substance level, none of us are separate.
That's
It's the form that's made us apparently separate. And that's what I'm talking about, is that substance which unifies everything. The grate
Yeah.
and the, carpet and us and,
Right.
yeah.
I
Or
agree
it's a
completely with you, but
unified feel.
Unique, isn't it? Then?
it does feel.
A unified feel.
Right, but we've still got a problem here because if it's unified, there's no individuality in it at all.
No, there's both.
Right,
If there's a form, there's both, like the sea and the wave.
right, but what's holding the form itself then must be a recognisable difference.
Wasn't the substance itself being
Experience.
enhanced by
No.
the experience of the forms within it, informing it?
Yes, but that's what dissolves, isn't it?
You get into realms
Right.
you can't even speak of, aren't you?
Exactly, that's why I'm saying we're talking about abstractions here, because the only things that we're talking about really, the only things which we have experience of, and which is the evidential here and now, is forms made of substance. Here and now, when we recognise them, wherever we see a form, it's substantial, and wherever we see substance, it's formed. My point is that if you start to describe the difference of them, then you start to describe something which goes beyond our understanding of who we are and what the universe is. And that science is constantly trying to do that. And when we're thinking about it, what we have to do for ourselves is to keep bringing it back to experience, and to answer Hillary's question, where I think the evidence is in the experiences that we can have while we're still embodied. So that the evidence you would look for would be an experience of yourself which was an eternal one inside this body that you had.
But even that would not tell me about, sorry to harp on about ages and things, but this vast body that's been built up from somewhere, the Hindu religion or
It's unimportant.
But
That's just people.
elaborate it on it all as if somebody knows. And is it Sheila? Who's she?
Yeah,
Sheila just said before,
England or whatever, that you find out after you're dead just how you whether you'd passed the exam or not. But it's actually, you find out in the here and now. You experience it while you're alive, and in fact, they actually say that you can only do it while you're embodied. Very, very difficult for something which hasn't got a substantial, sensitive body to actually, or vehicle to actually. I'm getting a secret arcane signal from the back there. But it's 9 o'clock. We shall continue to discuss ideas, trying to get a handle on something which is extremely slippery. We haven't even talked about Zeno yet. Zeno came along, the third philosopher, which I didn't get to, but which is fascinating because he comes along and says, right, so let's talk about time. He said it can't possibly exist. Time cannot exist because it disobeys all the rules. The way I heard it was, in discussion, we came up with the fact that, is it possible to open a door? Yes, it is. Therefore, it must be possible to half open a door, yes, and a quarter open a door, and you can keep on dividing the opening of the door infinitely. And you cannot do an infinite thing in a finite amount of time. Even if it takes you 200 years to open the door, you can't go through all the infinite positions that door goes through in opening itself. The other thing which they're saying, the other one we talked about, the times arrow, which we just talked about, if you fire an arrow through the air, at any instant, and this is peculiar because science is coming upon this at the moment, as the arrow flies, the faster we can photograph it, the more still it appears. When we photograph it at extreme speeds, the arrow is always still. How the hell does it move? What actually is moving? Because this thing is made of atoms. It's still, whenever we look at it, and then it seems to appear over here. All those atoms have relocated themselves, and they're pushing through atoms of a similar sort of density. If we were a tiny spacecraft flying through that situation, we'd be flying through vast universes of space. What is actually moving? Zeno said time is impossible because that arrow at any instant is always still. And we're now getting to the point where we can photo almost millionths of a second, and the arrow appears to be still.
appears, but it isn't.
Well, the bullet then, or
whatever.
the photon.
It's just a play on words. It's
Paradox.
so
No,
like
it isn't. It isn't a play on words. It's a fact.
But something pulls the arrow back so hard that when it splunks away, it travels through space.
Yeah, but it
And
doesn't.
as sure as can be, that arrow will end up where you've.
But at any instant, it's still.
That's only on the photograph.
Isn't that the definition of an instant?
Sorry.
Isn't that the definition of an instant?
It depends. The definition of an instant is the smallest
So then
possible
it's an
time that you
instant
can
away.
manage to get. Yeah. So, well, philosophers have toyed with this for a long time. It doesn't seem to be just a description in terms of words, because when we have things like photons that travel at the speed of light, we then find that because they are approaching the speed of light, they don't seem to have any movement at all. To them, they are literally instantaneous. So the ones that left, God knows, some planet X1 several billion miles ago, they experience it purely as one instant of time.
I don't know whether it relates at all, but it's making me think of Paul Clay's idea of a point, and any line being a series of points.
Yes.
I don't know how it relates to that.
Yeah.
That's what comes to mind.
Yeah.
You actually, there's no such thing as a line, it's just a series
of points.
of
Yeah.
tiny points.
Yeah. And the line becomes the surface, and the surface becomes a solid whenever you move it. Yeah. Now those possibilities are the things that we're talking about that creation of situations which are very, very difficult to describe. It's language which starts to creak and break down because we're talking about things which they seem to be extremely elusive, but they are common, everyday things. We're talking about opening a door. We've all done it many, many times.
But it couldn't take 200 years to open a door.
Well,
It just couldn't, no matter how slowly
it's
you
true.
opened it.
It's true. So these instants seem to be moving at infinitesimal speed. To trust those particular moving points. We're not saying it doesn't happen. We're saying to describe it, we're making language break down. We're making the mathematics breaks down, but it's the same mathematics we use to make engines and to design aeroplanes and to build houses with.
Perhaps it's just the language that's breaking down. I
Absolutely.
mean, what he's saying is that the door cannot be opened. That's what he's saying. He's saying the arrow.
Yeah.
So he also says that, you know, a slower thing cannot be overtaken by a faster thing. It's impossible. And philosophically, it's true.
And mathematically, yes.
But well, I don't know about mathematically, but it's actually wrong, because we know that the arrow actually does move, the door opens, so he's exactly right. It's all nonsense. It's a paradox.
It's a paradox.
It's a paradox to do with language, but I wouldn't start getting too philosophical in terms of it's a paradox to do with language.
Right.
I think
Okay.
the arrow is always moving. The photograph that just photographs in that instant,
Yes.
it's its substance, but it's still moving,
Right.
even in that hundredths of a second or thousandths of a second.
Well, why isn't it blurred?
But that's the
If you
photography.
don't get the aperture
That's the
right.
photography.
It is if you don't get the aperture right.
Yeah, but so what it's saying is at any instant, but hang on, the photograph is proving that at any instant the arrow is still.
But it's not still, it's moving.
Right. Then why does it appear to be still in the
Because of
photograph?
the cleverness, for lack of a better word, of the camera.
The cleverness of the camera.
Yeah.
But isn't it to do with the fact that the actual light that it's emitting is showing that it's actually still at that point? Because remember that the instant that we're talking about, it comes down to the next thing which we were trying to talk about is what is now?
Oh, well, that's different.
Well, no, it's the same thing because at any given now when the camera works, that arrow literally is still at that point, and yet it takes time to move, but in those series of nows, at any point of those nows, it appears to be still. And mathematically, we actually describe it is still. And so the one literally about the hare being caught by catching the tortoise is mathematically, it proves the fact that as the hare tries to catch the tortoise, here's the tortoise, that's the hare, here's the tortoise. Every time the hare tries to catch him, the tortoise has travelled another amount of time. These are infinitesimally small, but mathematically it keeps reducing. The hare never catches that particular point. Now, the maths are important because it's the maths which describe the physics of the universe. Physics is pure
The maths
maths.
are wrong. It's very simple. The maths are wrong. Because believe it or not, the hare overtakes the tortoise. Therefore, if the maths say it can't be right, the maths are wrong.
No, the hare did catch the tortoise because he stopped and played around on the way.
That's the other version. That's Aesop's
Well, I
version.
can't see. Well, exactly.
We're doing Zeno's version.
The only thing we can think of, isn't it, that language is serial. We're speaking in a serial thing. And when we're looking at something like
Time,
speed and
which
whatever,
is
it's all serial as well, because time's serial.
yes,
But presumably, there's something else that isn't serial.
yes.
There's a simultaneity going on at the same time. We don't see that because we're so hooked on the serial.
Mm.
And
Well, of
presumably
course.
time is instantaneous, isn't it? And it's like an imaginary line that has no.
Think about now, because most people describe the notion of time in terms of past and future divided by now. and now is considered to be an instant. I've drawn a little drawing on here on the board because, coming back to Nietzsche, he considers that time, that we are tangential to time, that time is an infinite recurring thing, as we've said, and as he puts this in the Spig Zarathustra. And this now here, I think my German is horrendous, or non-existent is probably a better way of describing it. Augenblick, which is an eye blink. So he considers the existence of now is an eye blink. It's literally as short a time as that. Or it's like a moment in physics, which is a turning point. A moment means something is changing, and change is the big problem. When I was talking about the arrow is literally a metaphorical statement. Zeno was talking about change. The fact that things change from one thing into another, and the nature of the change, or how something changes, is a problem in terms of physics, in terms of how things are moving in time, and often it doesn't tie up. I come back to what St. Augustine said, that he thinks he understands about time until he thinks about it, and then he realizes it's got all sorts of problems in it. The other big problem is the now. Lots and lots of us have actually tried to be in the now as a meditative process. We need to think about what the now is, because lots of people have applied themselves to it, and again it's one of these peculiar things, because one of the fascinating things that I found about it when I was looking at it over about a year ago, where I was talking with a friend who's just produced a book on it, is that in terms of now, we have to think of it as an instant, but mostly we don't. We have quite a broad aspect of now. I remember one of the characters that I was reading was saying that musicians, for instance, tend to think of a bar as now, and the bar as being past, and the bar that's coming as being the future. So that we have, if you like, a matter of a few seconds which we consider to be now, because things are still changeable. Literally, processes are still changeable within seconds of each other. You know, if you're cooking something or whatever, you can turn something off once you've seen it going wrong. In terms of physics, of course, they would have to say that the now is like an instant. The idea that something is then immediately fixed and unchangeable is, again, a peculiar one when you consider that the future is so malleable and the past is so fixed. Nietzsche's concept here, he puts himself at that particular point and says that he's got eternity in front of him and eternity behind him. One is absolutely rigid and the other, and terrifies him, and the other one is completely fluid, and that terrifies him too. I find it fascinating because Rudolf Steiner considered himself to be a student of Nietzsche and inspired by his concept of man and Superman. The fact that you can actually make yourself into a higher being by focusing in the now, literally making time be your servant, if you like, so that you bring the best of you to any given moment, but you can only do it now. And the doing of it now is a constant process. You have to make this now as perfect as you can, because as far as he was concerned, you might live it again and again and again. I actually don't believe that, by the way. I'm saying this, and one or two people have said that perhaps he didn't quite believe it, because again he used the German word which is gleich, which is G-L-E-I-C-H-E, which doesn't mean exactly the same, it means very similar. So he might be considering the fact that it is possible to improve situation and to change life. The idea of eternal recurrence is a very old Greek form. It's an idea which is embedded in the story of Sisyphus, which you probably heard, the character who has to push a rock to the top of a mountain. Every time it gets there, it rolls back down again. He has to go and get it and roll it back up again, and he has to do that for all eternity. It's also echoed in Christian concepts of hell. Hell was always described not just as an unending torment, but recurring torment. It goes round and round again, so that the body that is being consumed in the flames doesn't finish, doesn't disappear. It continually is burnt in the flames. So the idea of eternal torment was eternal torment. Your body didn't stop feeling pain. It's a very enjoyable little edifying concept of pain, of hell, which fiendishly described, of course, to children to make them behave themselves. But so the idea of eternal recurrence is not a new one, and it isn't limited to just German philosophers of the late 19th century, sorry. It's a very old concept, and it tends to be extremely destructive to human sense of meaning. That's why the Bertrand Russell thing is so damaging and devastating. Now, as opposed to that, you have to think in terms of the fact that improvement, we've just been talking in the break there are lots of people at the moment who consider that the world is going to the dogs. There's an awful lot of people who consider that the world is actually improving. It's very possible for human beings to look at the same situation and see it both ways. We have to consider, literally in terms of the way we interpret information and how and why we're interpreting it in a particular way. Time is usually described metaphorically. It's usually described as something which is coming towards us. Because we tend to think of the past as being behind us, I'm facing into the future, there's something, I've got to face something that's going to happen in a few weeks' time, or that situation is behind me now. We have this feeling that time is coming towards us, we're facing it, it passes us, and we can turn around and look at our past and face into the future. Now that metaphor is something which again rests on this concept of where we are now. This nowness is fixed by a sense of ourselves which is immediate. What that now experience is, I would suggest, is a very important one, which Nietzsche didn't, he was on the brink, if you like, of describing, because I think it's purely consciousness. That the consciousness is what makes the now what it is, and its fleeting aspect is because what you're aware of becomes unchangeable very quickly. The consciousness literally feels like it's a cutting edge. Does that make sense? So there's another description of it, we are moving, if you like, into the future, or time is passing us and we are still, and we are viewing it and we can see possibilities ahead of it. We're pretty sure the sun will rise tomorrow, but other things that are going to happen we can be fairly sure about, but we know that there'll be a lot of changeability in it. Whereas we know for sure that the sun rose yesterday, and we know everything that happened about it, if we can recall it, everything in a fixed sense that actually happened about it. The difference is this point now, where we're able to change what's going on. We can change our experience, modify the past, and literally redesign the future, is the way it feels to us. Is that right?
I understood now being that being in the now moment is actually approaching whatever one is doing, whatever is happening in that moment, as fresh. So it's not a thought of planning to change for the future or remembering what's in the past. It's actually just being totally open to what is happening now and responding to the need in that now moment. So it wouldn't be determining, I mean it would necessarily determine because each moment does, it adds up as you move on, but it wouldn't be in the mind of the person actually in the here and now, as usually you would call it, as to whether it was going to change the future or not.
Right.
because that would be something outside the now moment.
Yeah. Would you say that's what everybody sees, or would you say that's your personal interpretation
That's
of
what I
it?
understood us to be, what Eugene to say, and
Right.
also the Vedic way as well, which is something else I'll have a look at.
The Vedic way. Yeah. Which Vedic?
School of philosophy, but
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a big school.
Vedic, oh right.
Sankhya
right.
is part of
Sure.
that. You see, that's
Yeah,
what.
yeah, right.
Yes, and that's a developmental way of looking at it. I think most people would tend to say, though, that in any given situation, say, for instance, me giving this talk now, the past is influencing me directly, because the thoughts which are coming through to me are coming largely out of my past, out of stuff I've read. So that's informing me, and but consciously I'm selecting which ones to actually say and not say, and that's literally...
That's in the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's being pushed, if you like, from the past, which is informing me of what I can do.
It's like Eugene was talking to me once about technique and painting
Yes.
and drawing. And what he said is that you learn the technique in the conventional way,
Yes.
but when you actually start to paint, you forget it all, and what's important will come through to you, will
Yes.
come through in the act,
Yes.
because you've got it in your experience, which
Yes.
is what you're talking about now. You've got to have the experience that you're speaking from,
Yeah.
but you won't necessarily speak from it.
Yeah.
In the moment, something else might come up.
The way I would interpret that is that if I'm pondering, looking into the past as to what I've done before all the time, that will interfere with the
Yeah.
freshness of this.
Yeah.
But actually I'm resting on the very fact, for instance, if I'm painting a picture, that I know the constituents of how to mix colours and literally how to approach a frame and an easel and things like that. Because if that experience isn't written into me, I'm not even going to get started.
But if you're thinking about that when you start, that will actually impede.
Yeah. That's right.
So
But
you
there's
have to
some,
drop it.
there's a
consciously.
feeling, if you like,
Yeah.
of experience which allows through. Now that's very important, because the feeling state, not the thought process, but the feeling state of my experience, resting on that, is something which
It might give you power and makes you happy.
it's not so much it gives you power, but it's also something which describes, and if you like, Eugene's putting here in terms of the eternity, it's allowing for the fact that we are creating ourselves in time as we go along, and that creation rests on the fact that we're coming from something. We have to have that. I'm trying to think, Whitehead, the philosopher, calls it prehending, by which he means feeling. You have to have a feeling of where you've been, otherwise you can't create yourself into the future.
Yeah. In the moment, it might be that something happens that you've not experienced before and you've not known about before at a conscious level or a technical level.
Yeah.
Because when I've worked with people who haven't had any art training whatsoever, sometimes in the painting or drawing that they've done, something's come through they couldn't possibly have chosen to do.
Yep.
That's
A happy
technically
accident.
correct.
Yeah.
That's technically correct.
Yes.
In quite a sophisticated way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it might not do it another time.
That's true.
It's not something they can hang on to, but it actually comes through in that moment
Yeah.
from the field.
Or
So-
from inside of them, because human beings have been painting for a hell of a long time. There must be an awful lot of skills which have been absorbed. So if you look like someone like Picasso, who
Different
had,
lifetime.
well, Picasso's father was an art lecturer and his grandfather was an illustrative artist. So you could say that the fact that he was drawing extremely well by the time he was 12 might have been that, there were certain skills which had been
Yeah.
passed on.
It's difficult to know, isn't it, how much of which is which, because obviously there is genetic and there is practice and there's all those other things, but I think they're all in the field.
Sorry.
I was just thinking, the time when you're most exhilarated is when you're really in the air.
Yes.
Because, like you're saying about when you're playing music,
Mm-hmm.
at any moment, you have to do it now. You have no choice. You have to do it at the right moment, or it just doesn't work. So you have to be totally, hopefully,
Yeah.
switched on,
Mm.
and that what you do there is relating to what's just happened, and it has to link it to what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Which could go different ways, but it has to be a proper narrative, but it has to happen now every time, and it's very exhilarating. And also, when I was looking after my son's football team.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of play is the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I saw what they love in it.
Mm.
Is that anything they do, any moment, could do that same thing.
Yeah. And
It
influences.
could be a magic moment, couldn't it?
Yeah.
That just makes something else happen, and then they just feel great.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what they're searching for. So, or if you play a game with children, or any if you really play a game, which is exciting, isn't it? Because you don't know what's going to happen.
That's right.
But you have to do something that hopefully will make it happen.
Yeah.
This
And
is
that's
without
very exhilarating.
That experience,
feeling.
of course, completely contradicts the mechanistic universe,
Yeah.
which says that you can't do anything really new that isn't already programmed into your cell structure and stuff, or that it would, it can only be haphazard.
And
So that
presumably-
experience
yeah.
contradicts that.
But presumably the trick in life is to live every moment like that. So how do you do that? That's the really big thing, isn't it?
Well, Nietzsche said you have to get scared.
Yeah.
You have to literally see that the opposite of that
Uh-huh.
is to be mechanical.
Yeah.
And if you're going to break the mechanism, the mechanistic way, and literally, this is very important for us as human beings, if we're going to break that concept, then we have to do it in the now and try and live in the now as much as possible. Not because it's that instant, but because it allows for the creativity of possible choice.
I think
Eugene's point was that we can only experience that literally that choice as a now,
Yeah.
but we remember the fact that we could have acted differently, and even the philosophers and the scientists who are total mechanists, as Sheldrake pointed out, are very much concerned with the fact that they thought of that idea and that their book is the best one on the subject. So they take it seriously. Their individual meaning rests on also the choices that they've made as a human being. Our human meaning rests on the fact that we make a difference, and that we make a difference only in the now. So to us that instant is terribly important. Sorry.
I always feel that you rest on the structure, and the structure seems to me there's two forms. There's the one that you've worked at through a long period of time, that you've devoted energy to.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got some knowledge there of this does this and this does this, and if I do that, that'll happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the structure that you inherit
Yeah.
because others of your kin or whatever, or the people who affected you, you've taken note of it at some level, and it's part of you, so the structure there. And then, in the moment, you don't bother with it, do you? It takes care of itself, and it conditions or move or decides in a way what will come up then. It just comes up, isn't it?
You see, that word prehend links into a philosopher called Whitehead, who I know that Eugene had read a lot of. Philosopher died during the war. What he was saying is exactly what we've said about the Tao and about Vedantist thought, is that there are no things in the world, there are only events. And Whitehead said everything is a process. You are a process, your body is a process, it goes through forms, it's eternal stuff, behaving through forms and moving into other ones. But the important thing is that we are conscious at that point, and our consciousness feels itself in that now moment, and it feels its past, and it chooses its future. And that's why it's a cusp, if you like. And he was concerned with the fact that if I'm now, this could be you might be experiencing it in a completely different way. But for me, I'm here at this point. My choice is literally what I say next. And that is forming in me, not consciously in that I know what I'm going to say until I've said it. I'm actually listening as you are. But I can feel what I want to say. It comes as a feeling, not as a thought. And it turns into a thought as I say it, and then it's gone and it's fixed and it's quite clear as it moves into the past. Now that level of experience means that I can then be creative in a universe which is similarly being created at every level, because it's always an event and it's moving out of this, if you like, eternity of possibilities. In eternity is all conceivable possibilities that might possibly happen, and what we're doing is we're bringing one or two into a situation, allowing them for a moment, and then choosing another one as well. How does that feel?
Yes, without the ego, you can't have ego in the moment. There's no creativity. So with creativity, thinking about what Samaya said, there's no ego in that. I just thought that needed to be said.
Well, the way I would describe ego as being a fixed thing,
right,
where you think of yourself as an event, as a person rather than
yes,
an event,
I'm
rather
doing
than
it.
a process.
I'm doing it
Yeah.
rather than
Yes.
doing it. Yeah.
And
yes.
so you're allowing the process to virtually not so much do itself, because you're the one who's pointing. You know, you can't. It's not just a complete haphazard. It's not an accident that you're standing in front of the easel with a paintbrush in your hand. So you'd have to say there's a feeling which has brought you to that situation. But if you do have a fixed concept of what you're going to produce, or
yes,
how
that's right.
yeah,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
process then will allow.
Yes.
Eugene always used to say, by the way, in terms of drawing like that, you have to start first, which is mechanical, because you want to get the movement. Once you start moving, then you can actually be creative. But the initial movement is often literally to start moving first. Practically, he said, that's the way to do it, because then when you're moving, then the dynamism of the thing takes over. It's very, very difficult to be creative from a standing start, is what he said to me. And that's the way he used to start those drawings, which he did. If you look closely, they start with a big movement, which is him literally saying, well, it's going to be within this picture frame, so he's off, and then it starts to flow through and down his arm into the picture, so to speak.
I just think all these examples are marvellous about the moment.
Oh, thank you.
What Sheila, yes, fantastic. And what Sheila says about sport, you know, about organising this thing. And any time in your life when you are caught up in, it hasn't happened to me very often, but occasionally, and I've seen it with other people, where everything's coming together of some project that you are masterminding or something. The bliss of that type of thing is one happiness. But there are many, many times of being in the moment that are positively, to me, boring.
Yep.
And I've had great happiness out of something coming, like a phone call that's believed, it's given me so much happiness. I've been able to live on it for the whole of the evening with nothing happening.
Yep.
And experience much deeper happiness.
So what you could say with that, Hilary, is then that there needs to be some sort of a connection with a situation or a process which is larger than yourself. When you talk about a sport or music, it's quite different when you talk about art in that sense, unless you see yourself as part of a continuing, growing, almost a history or a development of art. But you're actually, I mean, the Sheldrake's very interesting on this, because what he actually says is you get a group feel for a particular process, like in the sport. You know, the sportsman will often say you're in the zone when you're not thinking, you're not yourself, but the whole process seems to take itself over, and it puts you in the right place at the right time or in the right moment. I mean, I've seen some musicians actually going, waiting for the moment to come in. Yeah, so it's not creative and it's not spontaneous, it's very mechanical, you know, especially the fellow with the triangle. You know, he's up to 4,330. So yeah, but it can also be, as it has to be in jazz. I mean, you know, in jazz it's interesting because they start with a predicted thing. They're going to play Honeysuckle Rose, and they start it off, and then then we're going to start to improvise, and the time frame is still there, and that's keeping them going, and eventually, you know, they all come back to the same tune, but they're going to go off it a bit, and each individual will take it off, but he's got a slot to take it off in, if you like. So there is a structure which is felt, which allows for the creativity and then brings you back again so the next guy can take it over when you know, and take, and eventually you even come back to Honeysuckle Rose again and then finish the piece and then on to the next one. So there's got to be something you can feel that's recognisable that's going to take you into the creative part as well. And the fascinating thing about Whitehead, he's saying that there's this flow in the, literally when it starts to happen, you can feel things outside of yourself. This is a mainstream philosopher. You can feel things outside of yourself coming in to help you. That's what he says. But you have to first of all start with this prehension of literally awareness of all the materials, of all the necessary things to get you into that place in the first place, and then that creation sort of takes over. What he's saying, in fact, then, is that in time, there isn't that moment as such, which Nietzsche's talking about. It's actually almost a lozenge-shaped thing where stuff is feeding in and it builds up, and that now involves a great deal of stuff all around it and then fades into creating this thing, which then lasts as a unit, and then it flows on again like this into another situation and then flows on into another, in the same way as water flows through a mountain stream, creating eddies and then moving on and creating something else. Different way of thinking about time, similar, very, very similar to the one that Eugene is describing there with the waves of the sea, I would say. Well, literally, remember Eugene used to talk about the long body. The long body is an idea that Alan Roberts is an event, if you like. It's a process that has happened in time. It's not a thing. It's something, energy, which is Alan Robertsing for a period, well, it's almost 23 years now, that being me. So this process started very small, gathered, and is created. It's the other thing which when I mentioned Whitehead here, but other people have done it. Arthur Koestler said it as well beautifully. Alan Roberts, anything is made of parts which have come together to produce him, to produce it, whatever it is. Any sequence, any situation at all is made up of parts. It's larger than the sum total of it. When you look, you realise that Alan Roberts is also a part of something else which is bigger than him, and that unit is part of something which is bigger again. These parts that make up Alan Roberts, whether it's lungs, legs, heart, brains, ideas, whatever it is, are all made of parts. And those parts are made of parts. And those parts are made of parts. So you've got a hierarchy of things which are all made of parts, if you like, and each one of those is made of parts. Koestler called them holons because they're wholes and they're also parts of everything else. And wherever you look, things break down into parts, and they also subsume into another unit, so that a person in an orchestra is part of the orchestra. They're also an individual playing an instrument. The instrument has come from a situation which is, is made up of parts. Their body is made of parts. Their experience is made of parts, and it's also all those things made from tiny units. They come together by an operation of something which is a process in flowing through. So it becomes rather like a mountain stream which is eddying, creating something and then moving on and creating something else. And therefore, what Eugene's saying, you can, if you're really very sensitive, say, this waveform here really does need a birth certificate, and we'll call it a name, and we'll take photographs of it, and then when it fades away, we'll all cry because it's got a meaning and it's an identical individual. We, in the same sense, are a process, a waveform like that, created of thousands of parts. So whenever we look at it, the materialist can say, well, actually, Alan Roberts is only we've reified a whole series of processes here. We've given a personality and a meaning to something which is made up of bits. If we grind him up, he's made up of protein, fat, minerals, whatever, bits of bone and stuff, and so's everybody else. He's only one of them. And the other bits as well, even his ideas and structures, you can see where he got every one of his bloody ideas from. They're not that clever. He gets them from books and off the radio and all sorts of bits of tripe, you know. And then he puts them together. They are put together. So there's nothing unique about them. It's all processes, but the things I do with them, you know, are directly controllable in terms of what I produce. The group we have here, part of the society that we're in, you know, all those processes, the thing which I feed into, which is larger than me, and takes what I give and adds something more to it and produces a society which is far more complex than any group of individuals could be. So these holons, these things which are being created all the time, have their roots which spread out into a whole field of enterprise, but Whitehead actually said, you can feel them, and they inform you in the now. They make you more creative if you tune into them. But you don't see yourself as a fixed thing, you see yourself as this process which is being shoved, if you like, by all these roots, all these feeling things which are linking into you.
Can I just say, I don't quite agree with you there, because I don't think that we are just bits. I think we are more than the sum of our parts.
That's virtually what Whitehead says. Yeah, that's what he's saying. That any one of these units is much greater than the parts that make it up.
That we made
Yeah.
up of.
Yeah.
Because each individual is unique, and there will never be another. There'll never be another Alan Roberts. There'll never be another.
Just like a ball bearing.
Yeah. Just like a ball bearing. There's no two people will ever be the same.
Now, this is directly in contradiction of what Nietzsche was facing it with the eternal
Yeah.
concurrence, because he was saying there will be, and it'll come back, and if it's only material, every thought will be the same, because you know, if you believe thoughts rest on atoms, those atoms come back to the same place. The thoughts are the same. So he was actually, what struck him was the fact that if he's realised that, he has to realise it every time. In the next 13 billion years, when it comes round again, he'll realise the same thought. And that was supposed to be the idea that perhaps drove him mad, but also drove him to conceive of the idea of the Superman, someone who did that deliberately and then plotted the possibility to wake himself up. There are people who believe that in ancient civilizations, the reason why they built these great big stone monuments was to try and wake themselves up. If they did ever come back as a reincarnation, or if they did ever come back as a soul, information which is put on them, symbols which are put on, to remind them of the fact that they should actually be as conscious as they can be in any given situation. I said that to Eugene once, and he said, well, the basic one is that one, and that's all you have to remember. I'm an individual in a situation which is being informed from a field. So if you've got the cross in the circle, if you tie all your concepts onto that, every time you see it, it will remind you that you're an individual in a circle and that you have to be conscious. That's what it's all about. If you want to be creative and to choose freely rather than to be driven by a situation. And he said, you find that everywhere.
Just makes me think of how, the blessing, or what's the right word, but to just be rational. Everybody in this room is rational and normal. To be, to be mentally damaged, or I don't know, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that when you bring your consciousness to bear on something, it's not a normal, rational. How awful that is! How that is accounted for in the system of things, love, God, or whatever, for people to be mad, to
Well,
be unable to
what you'd have to say is that reason is in that sense